Okay, let's get started, please. My name is Philippe Lecourt. I'm with the Harvard Kennedy School. Delighted to be back here at Delphi. And our session, which is going to be a bit shorter than the previous one, is called Constructing China's Belt and Road Initiative in Southeast Europe. And one of the reasons I'm delighted is that about this topic is that it's a kind of a new topic. Obviously, it covers an area which is which includes. I mean, if you look at the way China describes Europe in its documents, there is a kind of equivalence in the sense that Southern Europe and Eastern Europe are two different blocks, if you want. But there's obviously common ground through the Belt and Road, but not exclusively, between the southeastern part of Europe and southern Europe, where we're sitting now. In a few words, you all know that the Belt and Road Initiative, under the name of One Belt, One Road, was officially launched in 2013 by President Xi Jinping. There was both a land component, the Belt and Road Initiative, on the land part, which was mainly Central Asia, but also the 21st century maritime Silk Road, where obviously the south of Europe is involved, including this country. But that leads me to a question, really, is since we are in Greece and since the Piraeus harbor is now run by a Chinese company called COSCO, whether the Piraeus project is part of the Belt and Road Initiative or not. So if you look at the website of the BRI, it seems to be. But as far as I know, it was first addressed by the Chinese and the Greek governments before the launch of the BRI. So that sort of raises a question about China's interest in this region, which I think is longer term than the BRI, because nobody knows how long the BRI would last, probably for quite some time. But I think the real question might be, China's interest in Europe, China's rise in infrastructures, in economics, all this. But I would say, and I would ask to my fellow panelists, to try to address the issue of the impact of the Belt and Road on this region, and especially looking at the EU members versus the non-EU members, which I think is more or less including in Southeast Europe. And having done some work myself on Greece, Portugal, different countries which are EU members, as well as non-EU members, such as Serbia and other Balkan countries, I think there's something interesting to address here, which I hope we can touch. And I'm going to shut up now and just being the moderator, not start giving my own view. But let me briefly introduce Professor Zhiqin from Tsinghua and Dr. Zhanchen of the China Center for International Economic Exchanges, and my Carnegie colleague, Dr. Paal, who ran for many years the Asia program at Carnegie and is a distinguished fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So let's start with Professor Shi.
So, yeah, continue the last session. Yeah, we have this session about Belt and Road. Yeah, yes, just you mentioned that yes, Belt Road. BRI is a very important idea or concept since starting 2013. As we said, that from an idea, from a concept to practice, now to international consensus. So, as a matter of fact, I think, as I emphasized or indicated over and over again, I think this is an idea, an evolving idea from the very beginning and to now. Why I said this? Because from the very beginning, even people will try to understand the BRI from a certain perspective. I think it's okay if you from your perspective, you understand BRI. Anybody can understand BRI from their perspective or from their field. For economy, you can see this is an idea of economy. Yes, at the very beginning is from economy, just try to build bridge or infrastructure. Now we can see, even in China, every field is trying to connect his work with BRI. I think this is from a very single idea to comprehensive. And also, just now we mentioned that we're trying to talk about the implications of the impact of BRI upon the Mediterranean or the Southeast Europe. So at the very beginning, I think that we can see that the BRI very beginning maybe try to work to solve this issue with our neighboring countries, but now we can try that 6 economic corridors, and also we have the open to all. Yeah, open to all. And also we have an idea from the very beginning, 64 or 65 countries. Now, for those who are willing, who have the wishes to cooperate with, that's okay. And also, yeah, we have an idea, we have the across the BRI to the relevant countries. From neighbors to the world. I mean, very, very debate implications. I'm not sure whether all the participants were from the previous ones. I said there's a lot of debates about the idea. Anyway, I think it's changing. But now, I want to try to talk about the relations. So we know the main purpose is try to build an economic cooperative platform. I think this is the core ideas. When we try to understand the BRI, we do not try to understand from, as I emphasized, from one single point or one perspective. We should try to, we usually try to emphasize five areas. The first is policy coordination. The second is financial coordination, infrastructure, infrastructure, and also trade. The last people-to-people exchange. Yeah, I mean that we should try to understand in a very comprehensive approach. So that's why I emphasized from the very beginning. The next, what did BRI bring about in this area? I know we said that it's the very beginning is just try to have a platform, but we have the final destination with the Europe. Yeah, Europe. So Europe is a very important area for the BRI. So we try to have our BRI with the European Union's connectivity program. Connectivity program we call 战略对接. I don't know how to try to strategic match. How do I say? Maybe our colleague will try to give his explanations. So now for the Europe, I think there is a lot of debate in Europe. Some maybe are very skeptical. Some are very positive. Yeah. Anyway, so in recent years we have a new platform we called 16+1. So I think this is a very, very important implication or impact for EU. In the 6+1, we think that there are 11 EU membership, and the others are not EU membership, but they are the candidate who are applying the membership of EU. So, in China we have a special institution devoting to European study. We call in CAS. We call the European Institutes. I was the frequent participant of their activities. So in the past, we'll try to talk about, when we talk about EU, we'll try to EU only the West Europe, but not the Poland, not Hungary, not the Czechoslovakia, but we have more cooperations with the Western European countries. But in recently, we have that's why I want to people-to-people exchange. We have more and more people-to-people exchange with the Central Eastern European countries. Yeah. In academic, in culture, in tourist, even for for Greek, I think that it's very, very important for our countries to have a very cooperative relations. For example, today we have a participant who is my student from Greek, Vasilis, he's my student. And since the BRI, we have more contacts. 5 years ago, maybe that was the first time for me to be in Greece, and this is the second time. And we have a cooperation with the Las Caritas foundations. Every year we should have a group of Tsinghua students to be here. I mean, with BRI we have more exchanges, more exchanges, students exchange and academic exchanges. And due to the BRI, I was in 2018, I was in Central East in Bulgaria. We have a network, and also because of the BRI, last July I took a group of students to Serbia. We said that BRI has really made great contributions to or new complementary to our China-EU relations. For example, when I was in Serbia, we said we have some flagship program of BRI. One is the we call the Smedelevo. I don't know whether I pronounce this word correctly. They have a very traditional iron and steel plant which is going to be declined, to corrupt, or to bankrupt with the Chinese help, and this steel plant started to make profit. So when I was there, almost all the staff and management of the workers, when we talked with us, they are very, very grateful. They are very, very excited about our cooperation. They said that it's China's steel plant, give us a new chance for their employment. And also another is when we were in Serbia, we found many young, talented young people who were employed by Huawei. They have a very, very high salaries. They're very, very happy. So just like these examples, I think it's very, very many of these cases. And also in Greece, we find that we have the Costco, Piraeus port. So with the Costco's investment in Piraeus now, and this port becoming very influential, very one of the largest, very active port in Europe. I think there's also the contribution of the BRI to this area. So these examples, like in Serbia, in Greece, even in Czech. Now we are talking about we call the Shunsai Tielu from Hungary to Serbia, and then we have the China and EU railway from the Czech to Piraeus. Okay, I think that many of these examples indicate that BRI is really trying to bring our benefit as we did in the other areas. For example, in Central Asia, with Chinese help, Central Asia, Kazakhstan has a seaport, and also with the BRI, Pakistan has solved its shortage. Anyway, I think this is not how do you say? This is a very, very program initiative which is bringing benefit to our cooperative countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shi. Dr. Paal, you're based in the US. You've been everywhere, including spending a lot of time working in China with Chinese. From your point of view, do you see the influence of BRI in Southeast Europe being significant? And more generally, do you think the BRI encompasses the whole of China's sort of economic involvement, or is it just part of the story?
Well, thank you, Philippe. I'll give a brief acknowledgement to the organizers and thank them for bringing together such fine panelists and good audiences here in Delphi. I'm also going to express some humility. Sitting next to Philippe, who has done real on-the-ground research on the BRI and its interaction with Southern Europe, I pale in comparison. And I think to dodge those comparisons, I'm going to focus on the general aspects, which I think apply quite forcefully to South Europe, but deal with questions of the continuity of BRI. Will it last? Secondly, what are the sources of change in it, and how will that lead to adaptations? And finally, what I think are principal policy responses that are appropriate for the BRI, both as it persists and as it changes. The origin of BRI is plainly spoken of two sources. One is the strategic competition with the United States. If you remember, 2013 was a year and a half when this was announced by Xi Jinping. It was a year and a half after Barack Obama had announced the pivot or rebalance to Asia, and that he was going to dedicate more resources and reapportion resources to Asia to deal with the rise of China and the competition coming from Beijing. At the same time, China had reached a high level of development, and as in the case of the United States back in the 40s, Japan in the 1970s, and even in a small example, South Korea in the 1990s, it had reached a period of basically full industrialization. It had excess capacity to deploy. It needed to find sources of employment for people in those industries that could be deployed overseas. And so it was natural that they would look to extend Chinese credits. China had at that time about $4 trillion in foreign exchange reserves. It seemed to be very fat. It could extend those resources and at the same time provide employment at home. So those conditions are still pretty much there. The need to deploy the excess steel capacity, which China could help by reducing at home and creating better markets for its European steel partners. China will also have continued strategic rivalry. The pivot of Barack Obama has become the kind of new Cold War of Donald Trump. And then finally, because President Xi Jinping has made such a high priority politically of the Belt and Road Initiative and identified himself, and by the way has taken care of any term limits he might face, there's a good long prospect that this will be one of the signature programs that he will not drop. And everyone realizing that in China has tried to align themselves, whether they were doing something for 10 years before the announcement of BRI or only came up with something to do under BRI in the aftermath of it. Everything fits under the BRI formula today in order to be politically correct in China and in alignment with the top leadership. Now, what are the sources of change that may come to bear on this broad effort? First, it's important to remember that the Belt and Road Initiative is a vision, it's not a plan. It was a look out, how do we expand our influence, without saying so, how to resist American pressure, without saying so, how to maintain employment at home. And so a vision was articulated in Kazakhstan by Xi Jinping in 2013. But no mechanism was set up to create the plan. There were no guidelines, no transparency rules, no creditworthiness of the borrowers. The money became freely available, especially to state-owned enterprises. If you had ambitions to take a state-owned enterprise, and I think the figures from Chinese sources are 80 major Chinese state-owned enterprises initiated 3,157 international BRI projects. They would probably not have done that if they had to raise their own funds. But suddenly funds were bursting out of the Chinese policy banks, and why would you not grab the opportunity to go with it? Well, those situations are changing. The disorganization of the early days of the BRI has led to some scandals. Malaysia stands out, and I would be happy to talk in the Q&A about the peculiar characteristics of that. People talk about Hambon Tata, the base, the port facility in Sri Lanka. That long preceded, actually, what happened in the case of the Belt and Road Initiative. But it has been emblematic, and it's caused countries around the world to perk up and worry that they might get trapped in debt that would force China to take equity in their infrastructure if they take debts on that they can't repay on a reasonable basis. Many of the Chinese loans were at a higher rate of interest and a rapid pace of repayment for infrastructure, and therefore they were not really sustainable. And so countries, especially ones that have been unguarded in their contract writing, will face some payment problems and debt traps. The Chinese economy at home is also slowing. Some of the U.S. trade dispute has something to do with that, but primarily it's slowing for its own reasons. You can't grow at 10% forever, and China's discovering that it's much better to grow something like 4 or 5% and call it 6.5%, and it may even be lower than that before long. So they're not going to be able to sustain the kind of flow of cash. The $4 trillion in foreign exchange that China held at the time the Belt and Road Initiative was inaugurated has dwindled a lot. They're trying to rebuild it. China at that time was attempting to make the renminbi an internationally convertible currency. Even down to today, however, all of the Belt and Road contracts have been done in US dollars. And then finally, one thing you don't see reported in the Chinese press, but I pick up on when I'm in China on a daily basis when I talk to people from China in the US, that is the deep popular dissatisfaction with the Belt and Road Initiative. Many people in China, especially young people, say that opportunity is being handed over to foreigners that they feel that they should get at home. They can make a case about the backwardness of Western China, and that's where the resources should go, not to Africa, Latin America, or Southern Europe, especially not to the fat and rich Europeans. So this is this public skepticism, while not publicly expressed, is certainly being felt by the leadership. Now, what does this mean for policy responses? Well, my government has been taking a posture of overt opposition to the Belt and Road Initiative. I think this is ill-considered. It doesn't look good to the recipients of Belt and Road money in poor countries when there's not an offer of an alternative from the US or the West or Japan. And secondly, it tends to be an artificial circumstance when the United States, which back in the 40s and 50s built infrastructure, doesn't compete in that sphere anymore. We are a country that can offer financial services, technical advice, environmental studies, and we should be turning our opposition to the Belt and Road Initiative into an offer to provide those very services, which will be important to the recipients of Belt and Road projects as the years persist ahead. I think we've also had a political tin ear for, we tend to lecture people, tell them not to take on debt when we're adding to our own debt at a very rapid pace. We should be thinking how some of our policy statements will sound to the ears of the well-informed in many other parts of the world. The United States, and I think most countries, despite the large number that have signed up for it, really should not get too close to this project. The drivers, strategic considerations, and domestic employment are going to sit awkwardly by the agendas of most countries that want to work with BRI. Offering services, offering cooperation, but deep integration with BRI is probably inadvisable for countries at a certain amount of application of democratic governance to supervise these projects to keep them from going down the path of corruption, which is so easily taken. On the Belt and Road, China has been scoring many own goals. They've made a lot of mistakes. As Professor Shi was saying, it's been an evolving process. They've had to learn from the mistakes that have taken place. I wouldn't want to get in the way of those. Let China make its own mistakes, take its own credit for that. We also should be careful not to, if an economy is suffering, and the origins of the Belt and Road in Southern Europe were the aftermath of the Euro crisis, and there were need to pay bills, lecturing people that they shouldn't find ways to pay their bills isn't going to get you very far politically. And then finally, just as a general proposition in dealing with China in the current period, I would not worry myself about too much Chinese success. I think that the Chinese are going to display their shortcomings in great quantity over the next few years. For example, on the state-owned enterprises, Xi Jinping is making it emblematic of his government to bear down on the state enterprises. And as a colleague of all of ours from the Peterson Institute, Nick Lardy, recently documented in his book, The State Strikes Back, that it's taking 6 or 7 renminbi more each year for state-owned enterprises to return another renminbi back. They're on a failing economic slope, and they're going to have to make changes of their own. Let them come to their own realization. Don't get involved in pushing them down that slope, because that will just stir the nationalist resentment of the people of China against the outside world. But leave China to its own devices. That's for
Thank you very much, Doug. Very interesting. I'm just wondering, having listened to Cheng Li earlier about his, you know, the divided rule, the internet division, whether the West or the US can actually provide internet services to the Belt and Road projects. But anyway, let me turn to Dr. Xu, and I'm sure you're going to tell us a lot about the impact of the BRI on Southeast Europe.
I'm so happy to be here to attend the forum. Despite misunderstanding on BRI, but I think I need to.
Can you speak a bit closer to the mic?
Oh, yeah. So I think I need to understand the BRI from economic prospect. I think I try to find the solution to the problems facing the world. You know, the governance, the development, and the poverty. So I think the BRI is a good solution for these problems. Let us introduce the achievements about six years. BRI achievement is more than expected. So a lot of countries want to join the BRI. I can give figures. China has signed 170 cooperation documents with 122 countries and 19 international organizations. So I think it's evident countries want to join BRI and support BRI. Regarding the South Europe development, parallel support is a good example for Greece and China. This is very successful. Parallel support is called Bigang in Chinese. So you know, I know the parallel support project has created 10,000 jobs for Greece, and BRI has, I think, for the Southeastern Europe, the one of opportunities for the region countries. In the Southeastern Europe is a special location, and they can connect the Middle East, North Africa, and a lot of countries. So BRI BRI can enhance the ability of the Greece. Second, I think BRI can reduce the gap between the Southeastern Europe and the Western Europe. I think the BRI can promote the growth of the Southeast countries. So maybe can BRI can reduce the gap, the different parts of the euro. BRI is in line with the benefits of the European Union. I think this is very good for the whole European Union. I think I feel a lot of people welcome BRI in future. So a lot of people have get benefits from the BRI. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We have almost 10 minutes for Q&A, and Dr. Xu just mentioned a figure of 10,000 jobs created at Piraeus. Since we are in Greece, I'd love to hear more from Greek colleagues, and we have very prominent scholars around this table. I'm glad they are sitting here. So can we have some ideas about the benefits of this Chinese investment in Piraeus? An economist.
Yeah, Plutarchos Akelaris, professor of economics and finance, but also senior fellow at the BRI Strategy Center at Tsinghua. I was actually going to ask a question, but since you asked that, I was chief economist of the government during the time 2004-2008 when the privatization of the Piraeus port business started. So I followed it without being, of course, involved in it from close. And I'm strongly of the opinion that this is one of the best privatizations that have happened in the country, and certainly has given a rejuvenation to an extremely important asset in the country, and has made Greece the entryway for Europe, for China. So I cannot give you exact numbers of employment and so on, but I can definitely tell you that I think it was a great project for Greece. Now to my question. I wanted to ask a little bit something about the financing modes of BRI. So any investment project, you can finance it either with equity or with debt. And debt can have different modes and can have different covenants. And any investment project, you actually, however you finance it, you have to look into its economic and social aspects and sustainability. There have been a lot of issues with the terms that some of the debt finance that have been given, they were alluded to earlier, but also about the economic and social sustainability sides of many of these projects. So I wanted to hear from the panelists, first of all, whether they see any chance of the mode of financing turning from debt financing to equity finance. Clearly, the Piraeus port is an equity finance project. Most of the other BRI projects are debt finance projects, and there are different incentives to equity holders than to debt holders. And secondly, to the extent that these are going to continue to be debt financed, whether they see a different form of debt financing. And I would like to, so for me, a different form of debt financing is the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is operating very much like a modern international financial institution. So I know it's a lot of stuff. Anything that I can get on this would be extremely important for me.
Okay, we'll take two more questions if there are. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Just two numbers to understand the BRI. One number is according to the IMF, the totality of projects that China has spent in the BRI is about $600 billion. The amount of cash and batter that the United States has spent in Iraq and Afghanistan is $1.4 trillion. So when people think of the BRI as something large or something disruptive for globalization, for Eurasia, I'm thinking of the US, and I'm thinking of, we wouldn't have been talking about the BRI if the United States has not made those strategic blunders in the past 10 years. And just very quickly about the Asia Infrastructure and Investment Bank, I think it was a lawyer from the World Bank that wrote the Constitution. So the US, of course, has not endorsed the bank, but I'm wondering if in the future there is a potentiality for the US joining the AIB. Okay, shall we have another question, or that's it?
Yes, the lady there. We need more ladies.
I'm just trying to take this opportunity to hear experts on BRI. We have Mr. Douglas Paal, I think that's how he pronounces his last name, at Carnegie, specializing in Asia program. Would you like to comment on, you referred to Hambantota in Sri Lanka and you mentioned Malaysia, and one has seen how this project has played out in Africa, Djibouti or Eritrea and various other areas. A couple of questions. One, would you like to, what's your take on this project's evolution in Southeast Europe? Because that's what the topic is. I know it's been a huge success in Greece given the circumstances and all that, but how do you see it evolving? Do you think it may be essentially different from the way how it has been, how these projects have been financed in Africa or certain parts of Asia, etc.? About employment generation, after all, is meant for development of the countries. So is it just, do you think this is huge global philanthropic project, which could have been a UN project meant for global development, or there's certain objectives for the country which is doing that? Just your comments on these two aspects. Thank you.
Okay, we have 3 questions and 3 minutes, or 3 minutes 40. So that's going to be a tough one. But I suggest each of you take whatever question they want to answer, and we'll go in reverse order. We'll start with Professor Xu. Thank you. And then Dr. Paal, and then Dr. Xu.
Maybe some figures my colleagues will try to give you. I'm not an economist, so I just try to emphasize that the impact of the BRI in the Mediterranean countries or in the Southeastern European countries, even for Chinese enterprises and companies, from my experience in Serbia, that they are they have a great interest in cooperating with these companies. For example, when I talked with the Hegang, Hebei, He means Hebei steel and iron plant, and even also Chinese mechanical companies, all they said that the Southern Eastern European countries, the 16+1 countries, is a very good field to improve Chinese enterprise, because all the criteria, the very standard European criteria, they can try to learn to improve them fast by cooperating with these countries. This is the very important lessons from our Chinese enterprises and companies. Another is that just our colleagues commented that I know in Greece that all the scholars are very welcome BRI. Even in Bulgaria and Serbia, all the governing party or the opposition party, they are both have interest in cooperating with China. The third I want to say that we call the BRI, we call 共享, 共建, 共商 means to talk together, to build together, and to share together. That means that we are not to do it only by ourselves. We try to find cooperative partnerships. That's the main, the principle of the BRI. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Paal.
On the financing mechanisms, because this was a vision and not a plan, criteria were not put in place for how to construct the loans or equity participation. As you know, Piraeus was prior to the BRI altogether, and had the history that it has. In the absence of criteria from China, they adapted to the local environments. And there you see quality of governance makes all the difference. Some of the really corruptly governed African republics that took advantage of the BRI offers frequently took them in form of very high interest rates on very short repayment terms, which were simply not feasible with the revenues to be generated by the infrastructure to be had. And that they're now either being renegotiated or being turned into equity partnerships. There's a debate about whether that's going on in Kenya. It happened some time ago in Sri Lanka. There's a debate in Malaysia, as I mentioned earlier, which is, I think, of a very different nature. But as far as I can see, China is not the driver in the way these forms of finance take place. It's the locality receiving the assistance. Now, China was complicit. It went along with it, but it was not the driving force. Secondly, on the question you raise about employment and differential, again, my answer is the governance of the locality makes the difference. If you have legislative oversight, judicial oversight, you get a different kind of set of contracts than if you don't have those things. And one common observation, which I did not include in sources of change in the BRI program, is that so many of the early projects were almost entirely manned by Chinese, either management or labor. And that has run quite predictably into resistance worldwide. And China has been very quick to learn. And to repeat myself, as Americans learned in the 50s, as Japanese learned in the 70s, as Koreans learned in the 90s, you can't just export your labor. You've got to work with the localities. And I think China will go through the same learning curve. Because China is so big, it may take longer. But I think in the end, they're going to end up in a better place.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time, but please, Dr. Xu, can you make some final remarks and answer whatever you'd like?
Yeah. BRI success also depends what the country's situation is. So BRI has many projects in developing countries. You know, developing countries have different situation. Maybe if we have a striker standard, the result is it's difficult to how to implement the project. So I think it depends the situation. I agree with Paul. BRI is a vision, not a plan. So it need to do gradually. So it gradually, and it's a long distance, a long progress to do that. From the past, we know in the country. The people have the different part has a common idea to promote BRI, so the result is very good. Maybe in different countries have different domestic political situation, so the BRI have different results. Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you very much. That's all the time we have. Thanks for everybody.